Hello everyone, in this video we are going to learn about classification of igneous rocks. And these are the 4 lesson goals that I would like you to be able to do by the end of this video. So there are a couple things that I would like to mention in this video first, and mostly it's about igneous environment, which is the environments where igneous activity can occur. The first one is called the extrusive environment. Okay, this is the environment where igneous rocks crystallize on Earth's surface. And the rocks that crystallize on Earth's surface will be called volcanic rocks. And the second one is called the intrusive environment. This is the environment where we have igneous rocks that crystallize inside the Earth. Okay, and the rocks are called plutonic rocks. Okay, so remember that plutonic rocks form in intrusive environment, volcanic rocks form in extrusive environment. Okay, and I think this is something that is, something that we have discussed earlier when we try to differentiate between magma and lava, and that is exactly the same concept. Okay, so everything here below the surface of the earth will be part of the intrusive realm, whereas here above the surface of the earth will be part of the extrusive realm. Okay, so for the intrusive igneous rocks, they can actually come in various forms. Okay, here I have some sort of like stocks here. We get dikes, we get pluton, and we get batholith. But in this course, let's just focus on the three main things here. One is batholith, dike, and then the third one is sill. So let's take a look at batholith. Batholith is probably the largest body of igneous rocks, and it can cover up to hundreds of square of kilometer in area. Okay, and the example would be Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. So these rocks is actually granite batholith. All right. So that is the example of batholith. And if you go to Sierra Nevada, we would also have some exposure of granite batholith. I don't know. I've been to Yosemite National Park as part of it, and it's so beautiful. And you should probably go there as well sometimes. Um, Yosemite National Park, again, it is also part of Sierra Nevada batholith that is located on the western part of the United States. Here is an example of a sill. A sill is a sheet-like igneous rock body that are parallel to existing layers, and usually those layers are sedimentary rocks. Okay, so for example, this is a nice picture of a sill right here, and this is the illustration of that sill. Okay, so here is right in the middle, we have the igneous body, the sill itself. And as you can see that the sill is generally parallel to the surrounding rock layers. Okay, so here I have sedimentary beddings right there, sedimentary layers. And down here I have another sedimentary layers right there. And the sill, most of the sills, they are mostly parallel, generally parallel to the sedimentary layers, and that is the reason why we call this body of igneous rocks as sill. This is also another example of sill. Again, I have sedimentary rocks that are pretty horizontal in this case. Okay, and the basalt sill, again, it is parallel to the overlying and underlying sedimentary layers. Okay, and here is another beautiful of igneous sill right here. My goodness me. All right. And well, we don't have to go far away to see a sill. We have something that we call as palisade sill. So this is palisade sill. Now, if you don't know where palisade sill, this picture right here is actually taken across the river that separates New Jersey with Manhattan. Okay, so this view here is probably taken from Manhattan, New York City, by the way. Okay, so this is what we call as palisade sill. Again, it is actually parallel to the sedimentary rocks underneath it. And the last form of intrusive igneous rocks is called dikes. Now, unlike sills, uh, dikes are actually sheet-like igneous rock bodies that cut across existing layers of sediment rocks. So, for example, here I have sedimentary rocks that are again horizontal. Okay, here are some of those sedimentary rock layers right there, and look at what we got in the middle. We got an igneous body that simply cuts across all those layers. Okay, because this body cuts across the sedimentary layers, then we would call this as dike. Okay, simple as that. Now, the next thing that I want to discuss is igneous rock classification. Okay, when we classify igneous rocks, there are just two things that we look at. The first one is the texture of the rocks. And whenever we talk about texture, we mean the crystal size of the igneous rocks. Whether this crystal size can be seen by naked eyes, okay, or it's just too small that we simply cannot figure out what those minerals are. Okay, so that is the first thing that we look at, the texture of the igneous rocks. And the second one is the chemical composition of the rocks. Okay, and the chemical composition of the rocks are actually reflected by the mineral assemblages that we find within the rocks itself. Okay, so what kind of minerals that we have within the rocks. Okay, and that would tell us the combination of texture, and the chemical composition would tell us the name of the igneous rocks. So let's learn about the texture of igneous rocks first. And this is the first texture that I would like to introduce in this video, which is called the phaneritic texture. Phaneritic texture refers to coarse grained textures of igneous rocks. And what we mean by that is really these minerals that we see within these rocks are large enough to be seen by naked eyes. Okay, so for example, I can identify these black minerals as an individual minerals. I can also look at this color, this different color of mineral right here. That is also another individual minerals. And I can also see different, maybe these minerals right here, the pinkish mineral that looks like that. Okay, that is also another individual of minerals. So all of these minerals can be seen, can be identified by naked eyes. And whenever we have that condition, we would call the texture of these rocks as a phaneritic texture or coarse grained texture. Now let's compare that with aphanitic texture. This is the second texture that I'd like to introduce in this video. Aphanitic texture refers to fine grained texture. Okay, and as you can see here, these rocks have minerals because this is igneous rocks, but these minerals are too small to be seen by naked eyes. Okay, and this is what we call as aphanitic texture or fine grained texture. And the third texture that I would like to introduce is glassy texture. These textures happens or forms when there's no crystals formed. Okay, and here we have obsidian as the first example. We also have pumice or ash or volcanic ash. Okay, so these are examples of rocks with glassy textures where we don't have any crystals that form within these rocks. Okay, let's go back to these large crystals and or phaneritic texture and aphanitic texture. It turns out that the crystal size depends upon the rate of cooling, and the rate of cooling itself depends upon the environment where these rocks form. Okay, so for example, if I have an igneous rocks that have large crystals, It simply indicates that during the formation of these rocks, it undergoes slow cooling of magma. The slow cooling of magma actually allows these rocks or allows this magma to develop large crystals. And that is the reason why we can see individual minerals within these rocks. Okay? And these process can only happen inside the earth or within the intrusive environment of igneous activity below the surface. Okay, so that is something that I would like you to remember. Large crystals equals to or indicates slow cooling and indicates intrusive environment. The second one is whenever we have aphanitic texture or small crystals, like in these rocks right here, they are just too small that for our eyes to see. It actually indicates fast cooling magma. Okay, because the magma cools very rapidly, it actually doesn't have enough time to grow big minerals or to develop big minerals. And that is the reason why these rocks have tiny, very, very tiny minerals in it. Okay? And these processes happen only above the surface of the earth or within the extrusive realm of igneous activity. Okay? And it makes sense, right? Whenever you have lava on the surface, it will cools very rapidly because the Earth's surface is considered as pretty cold compared to um, the place where these magma comes from. Okay, so again, the crystal size depends upon the rate of cooling, and the rate depends upon the environment where it forms. So for example, again, I have three different types of rocks. I have granite, very coarse grain. I have andesite, which is aphanitic, and I have obsidian or glass texture. Now, if I create an order based on its cooling rate, it would be something like this. Okay, so this granite with phanetic texture, it cools very slowly and it happens only in the intrusive realm. Whereas the aphanetic texture, it actually happens very fast or it forms very fast within the extrusive or above the surface. And glassy texture would represent something that fast, super, super fast. Oh, sorry. Glassy texture would represent the cooling rate that is super fast. And that's what I meant. All right. And it happens only in extrusive environment. Okay. Typically, it actually associates with the explosion of a volcano. Okay. And that is the reason why it cools very, very fast. All right. So that is the order based on the texture. And the next thing that I would like to mention here is that there's actually a little bit of exception. Sometimes the rock has two distinct crystal sizes. Here, for example, I have an igneous rock that have a very large crystals right here, 1 and 2, right? But it is embedded within a very fine grain matrix, which is this black region right here in between those whitish uh, crystals. Okay, so how do we get something like this? How do we get fine grain crystals and coarse grain crystals at the same time? Right now, that simply means that these rocks underwent two different cooling rates. And whenever you have two different cooling rates, that means that these rocks cool down in two different environments. Okay. Um, the slow cooling rate allows these big crystals to form in intrusive environment, and then for some reasons, the magma was brought out to the surface very rapidly that caused these fine grain matrix to form. Okay, so that is basically the explanation for porphyry texture. How fast do igneous rocks cool? And these rocks, I mean, this illustration would tell you that The deep Pluton here, the cooling rate goes from months to years, but compare that with lava flow on the surface of the Earth that can only take days or maybe just maybe hours to cool down. Okay. So that was the first criteria when that we used to classify igneous rocks, and the second criteria that we use to classify igneous rocks is called the rock chemical composition. Okay, and the rock chemical composition is actually reflected by the mineral composition of the rocks. And that is the reason why it is important for us to again recall what we learned about Bowen's reaction series. Okay, because this mineral composition or mineral assemblage will tell us about the composition of the rocks. However, there's actually no need to do a chemical analysis because luckily the color of the rocks gives strong clues about the chemical composition of the rocks itself. So, for example, here we have dark colored basalt. Because it is dark colored, that simply means that we have mafic rocks. Okay, because we probably have a lot of mafic minerals in it, such as pyroxene or maybe amphibole in it, that makes this rock dark in color. Okay, so again, this basalt, based on color, we can infer that these rocks is mafic rocks, and it is, poor in silica. And that would be the opposite for granite here. Granite is light in color. Because the color is very light, then we can um, assume that it is felsic in composition or rich in silica. Okay, because most of these white minerals, they are probably quartz or plus plagioclase maybe. Okay, so that's the rock chemical composition, and something to remember is just remember this great analogy. Mafic is the darkest mineral or the darkest rock or the darkest cat here, and the intermediate would be a bit grayish, and felsic would be the lightest, have the lightest color. So for the classification for igneous rocks, there are 6 different types of igneous rocks, and we can actually create this chart right here like this. Okay, what we have here on the left side of this chart is the fine grain fine grain igneous rocks. Okay, all of these rocks have very tiny little minerals that we can't really see. Okay, so these are fine grain igneous rocks, and on the right side here we have coarse grain igneous rocks. Okay, as you can see here, those rocks here, they have large crystals that can be seen by naked eyes. Okay, and so that is the division between the left column and right column. But if you pay attention to this, the division goes in horizontal as well. So here, the first row, the top row here, represents the felsic rocks. Okay, and then the second row, which is this one, it represents intermediate rocks. And the last row, the bottom row, represents mafic. Okay, mafic rocks. So we go from mafic, intermediate, to felsic rocks. And then we also have division here: fine grain or aphanitic rocks and coarse grain or phaneritic rocks. Okay, and that is the way we classify the 6 types of igneous rocks. So then the question here becomes, I have 2 different samples. The one on the left, we have coarse grain, and it is dark colored rocks. And on the right, I have fine grain and it is also dark colored rocks. What are the names of the two rocks? All right, for those of you who answered gabbro for the left one and basalt for the right one, congratulations, you got it right. And the next one, here I have coarse grain on the left, and it is light colored rocks. And on the right side, I have fine grain rocks with light color. Again, what are the names of the rocks? All right, for those of you who answered granite for the left one and rhyolite for the right one, you are correct. All right, the last one that I would like to mention here is that do not forget about the ultramafic rocks. We already learned about mafic, intermediate, and felsic, right? Gabbro and basalt for mafic rocks, andesite and diorite for intermediate rocks, and um, granite and rhyolite for felsic rocks. So don't forget about the ultramafic one. Ultramafic represent the rock within the mantles, and it looks something like this. Okay, like this one as well. Okay, this is what we call as peridotite, and peridotite is a very special rocks that is very rich in olivine. Okay, and that is the reason why it has it right over there. Okay, so those are the rocks, the different types of rocks that we know, the different types of igneous rocks that we know, and how we classify them. Um, as usual, if you do have questions, let me know, and I'll see you again in the next module. Bye bye now.